So today we're talking with Erin Bishop, the owner and principal planner of Filosophi Events, a wedding planning company out here in Vancouver, BC. Erin shares her insights into how far out a couple should be looking to work with a planner for a micro wedding. She tells us what the difference between a micro wedding and an elopement is. She tells us the specific packages Filosophi have developed for micro weddings and elopements. And yeah, she just shares a lot of really good value, and this is going to be a really informative and valuable interview for you. So I'm Victor Fox. This is my new series where I interview wedding vendors and share them on my blog and on my website. If you find this interview valuable, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Okay, here we go. This is my interview with Erin Bishop. Erin, thanks so much for joining me today. Please give our listeners a little rundown on who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Erin, and I own a wedding planning company called Filosophi. I would say we're sort of known for working in sort of non-traditional weddings. So especially venues that weren't necessarily set up to be event venues, be it a backyard or a farm or a mountaintop or a beach or whatever. But we just really aim to create something unique every time we do a wedding and never repeat ourselves.
What's the difference between a micro wedding and an elopement? Is there a difference?
Yes, I believe there is a difference between a micro wedding and an elopement in a traditional sense. But definitely that line has been blurred a little bit as of late. And of course, everybody, might mean a different thing when they reference it. But to me, a traditional elopement is just the bride and the groom running off to have a wedding ceremony and potentially some sort of dinner, but with just the two of them. And then the necessary vendors. Of course, you need, you're going to have a photographer, video, your officiant, whoever else, you might need a musician or whatever. But it's the main thing is that the couple are kind of the only people there for it. Or maybe one or two friends with them. That would be sort of a traditional elopement, which was sort of escaping the hullabaloo of wedding planning and just keeping it simple and tying the knot and having it be quick and done. We've seen lately like elopements in that sense, but more elaborate. So with some decor, lots of little details and things like that, even if it's just for the two of them. The two people getting married, that they still have, like a table set up for them and have a fancy meal or have some decor at the altar or whatnot. But the sort of defining feature is that it's usually just the two of them or the two of them plus two guests, two witnesses. And then it moves over into micro wedding territory by my definition, when all of the things are still there, or most of the things that you would find at a big normal wedding, but just with much less people. So still having a ceremony with decor and some guests, still having a reception with some sort of like dinner and tables and decor somewhere, and some sort of after dinner goings-ons. Depending on the group size, it's usually not necessarily dancing, but maybe there'll be some music and some games or whatever. So there's still, tables with place cards and all the little details. But just rather than the more average size of like 100 to 150 people, this could be, 20 people or 30 people or 50. This year during the pandemic, we've really had to sort of figure out those distinctions because, of course, people were looking at doing smaller events, and we, in response, had to learn how to create some new packaging around those types of events. So for us, our kind of clear definition was it's an elopement if it's under 10 people and there's not a fancy, highly set up dinner after, and that it's a micro wedding if it's under 50 people. Yeah, but it is a little gray in there. If you have like 10 people, but you want a really elaborate reception, even though it's only for 10 people, we still consider that a micro because there's a lot of planning to be done there that doesn't exist if there's no dinner. Micro weddings are kind of fantastic for people who want to have a very like stylish, personalized, sort of opulent experience for their guests, but knew, that they don't have the budget to do that for 150 people. If you suddenly are just working with 30 people or 40 people, your budget go so much further, and you can do those really special touches. And so I think a lot of people have started to see the appeal of that this year. Things you could never do on a large scale are easier to do if it's just one table or one place card or whatnot. Things done by hand, or things that are just a bit more expensive in volume, are not such a big price tag if you're just doing 8 people or 12 people or whatever it is. So it's been fun to see some of the clients who have done really, really elaborate weddings this year, and have said, this is a wedding that I dreamed of, but I never would have been able to have with 150 people. And then this year I got to do it guilt-free with less people.
Are there any specific packages Filosophi offers for micro weddings and elopements?
A lot of elements of planning a micro wedding are the same as planning a wedding, and it doesn't make a huge difference to us whether it's 20 people or 50 people. We still need to, source all of the relevant vendors and design a table, even if it's just one table instead of 20. But we have sort of come to a place of a package that's scaled down from our normal full planning, just to sort of suit the scope a little bit better. And it's usually a bit of a less of a time commitment on the day of as well. So we do have a package that's specifically for micro, and specifically for elopement, and specifically for elopements with only a ceremony, or elopements with a ceremony and a dinner element after. So we've really had to fine tune that. But obviously we don't want to be charging more than the scope of the project. So this year really had us look closely at those variations so that we could have custom packages for those.
How far out from their micro wedding should a couple be reaching out to a planner?
I mean, in a perfect world, I would say 2 months or more. I've got a client right now, being the end of 2020, who is doing a very small wedding in 2022, and we're already working on it. They're just doing a 30-person wedding. So the more time, the merrier. I think the least time that would be comfortable would be like a month, but 2 months would be my ideal sort of minimum if I was given a choice. We had a few this year that were in that sort of 4 to 6 week range of notice. And if you decide to do it sort of more last minute like that, you just need to be prepared as the client to be a little more flexible with, the availability of vendors and locations and stuff like that. But if you get started on it early, and there's no reason why not to, then you'll have a bit more options with vendors and possible locations and things like that.
Are micro weddings easier to plan than larger weddings, or do they present their own challenges?
I do think it's easier generally. There's just something about a smaller group that allows for more possibilities. So the main way it's easier is that the possible venue options are so much more vast than if you're doing a big wedding. Here in Vancouver, if you're doing over 150 people, your options get quite limited. And if you're going over 200 people, extremely limited. And the higher you get, the fewer venues there are that can hold that capacity. But if you're talking about 30 people, 40 people, any restaurant in the city could be a venue. Every hotel has spaces for that. Parks, things like there's so little barriers to gathering a group of that size that it gives you a lot of options. So I think that makes it easier. As well, the transporting of guests to and fro, if that's a factor, from a ceremony to a reception, is easier. And just the time it takes to set up when you're doing a smaller space, a smaller group of people, is less. So yeah, I would say it's easier in quite a few ways, even though, as I mentioned, you still have to hire all of the same vendors, florist and photographer and makeup artist and officiant and all of that, regardless of your group size. But there are factors that make a micro easier. And certainly execution on the day feels so much more mellow when it's less people. After a summer of experience, I can attest to that. It is a different, more intimate, kind of laid back atmosphere on the day.
Have you found that most couples are happy to downsize their wedding and have a smaller micro wedding or an elopement, or are most couples waiting for the restrictions to lift so they can have a larger wedding?
I think definitely both extremes of that exist. For us, it's about half and half, maybe slightly leaning more on the side of people waiting, so postponing. But these are clients who, we've been well into the planning process. They've selected venues. They're locked in with deposits to certain places and vendors, where scaling down wouldn't necessarily make the most sense. So the financial side of that decision making is a big driver. And also just they've had this vision in their mind of this big party, and it's hard to let go of that. But the other half, I think I've seen a lot of like relief from people who are feeling like they're sort of free of having, a bunch of their parents' friends or like old friends that they'd never really see but felt like they should invite. They got to really streamline their guest list. And for them, and what I always say, is that this is about the marriage, and the two people getting married. It doesn't need to be about how many people are there. As long as the couple themselves are there, this wedding can happen. So for different people, every family is different. Everybody's relationships are different. And some of them just can't do it if their family can't fly in. They wouldn't want that. Others find it, like I said, a sense of relief to be able to go with a smaller group. I had one client this year who just had a total of 6 guests, including the couple themselves, and no family because their family was out of the country and couldn't come in. And we zoomed it, we streamed it live so the families could watch, and they'll celebrate with them at a later date. And they just had the best night with their 2 best kind of friend couples, and rented an Airbnb, and we did a beautiful thing up in Pemberton, and it was really, really magical in its own way. So it's hard to tell a client, what they should or shouldn't do. It really comes down to people's relationships and who it's important for them to have there, and who they can go without. Yeah, I definitely have become a huge fan of micro weddings specifically. So like a 20 to 50 guests kind of thing, where they have all of the sort of fixings of a traditional wedding in format. Just because it is really possible to do things, especially decor wise, which is a creative area for me that I really enjoy. You can do DIY stuff or really customized stuff, like I said, that you couldn't do on a huge scale. It would just be cost prohibitive or time prohibitive. So it's really fun. But moreover, I just feel like the quality of time that the couples we've had this year are having at a micro wedding is so elevated beyond the experience of, a 200-person wedding where it's kind of a whirlwind. I've seen them really get to have long conversations with everyone that's there. And the guests that are there get to all meet and kind of get to know each other more than just in a quick passing. And so it just really feels like a truly sort of intimate, quality, interpersonal experience in a way that a large event isn't. That's not for everyone, but I've definitely enjoyed seeing it. And I think the couples that we've had downsize their weddings or plan smaller weddings this year have really, really loved that element of the experience as well.
Erin, do you think micro weddings are here to stay?
They will be here to stay for a good chunk of people for whom that makes sense. And I hope that that's the case as well, because I really do enjoy it, especially for those clients who feel, like they don't like the idea of having everyone's eyes on them all day, and a big wedding feels like uncomfortable. Now they'll have an option that's different than what used to be sort of the only norm. So I'm happy about that.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about micro weddings and elopements?
I'm very interested to see how things roll with clients who have decided to do an elopement this year and then have a party later. I haven't fully experienced that yet, but I also really like that as an option for people who are, really excited to get married and decided to do an elopement, but also really want to celebrate with everyone. So I have a few clients doing that sort of plan, and I can't wait to get to the planning of the big party and see kind of what they choose to incorporate into that party, what's important to them, and just see how that all flows. But I do love the idea of that, because they got to have their wedding when they wanted with their most immediate, nearest and dearest, and then have this, what I think will be a much lower pressure, sort of easygoing, massive party later. It seems like the best of all the worlds. So I think that might be a really fun one for people who, know they want to do a big party. And I mean, outside of a pandemic, that could also be something fun to do, which is you have a very intimate ceremony and dinner with your sort of closest and most immediate family and friends, and then do a more relaxed, larger celebration later that doesn't necessarily have all of the expectation and pressures of a wedding. It's just like a super fun party. So that could become something that we see more of as well.
Erin, before we wrap up, please let everyone know where they can find more information about Filosophi events, and I'll include all of that information in the show notes below.
Awesome. Yes, we are at filosophi.com and we are at Filosophi on Instagram. Those are probably the best places to find us. Of course, Facebook and Twitter and everything as well. But yeah, at Filosophi on Instagram and filosophi.com are the best places.
Well, Erin, you provided us with a ton of value, and I'm super excited to get this interview out. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, Victor.